Imagine you were raised by animals, and you later become king of the jungle. Everything is great, until one day you meet a beautiful girl. George of the Jungle is a comedy drama film released in the year 1997. The plot of the film follows a jungle man, George, who after being raised in the jungle by an ape, becomes the king of the jungle. One day he rescues a girl named Ursula from a lion's attack and ends up falling in love with her. The movie starts with an animated prologue explaining how a baby named George ends up in the jungle, Bukavu, which lies deep in the heart of Africa where lions, elephants, and apes are found. One day, a plane crash leaves baby George stranded alone in the jungle. He grows up with friends like an ape named Ape, an elephant named Shep, and a bird named Tuki while swinging on vines. Now 25 years later, when baby George is all grown up into a swinging jungle king, he is swift, sturdy, confident, and clever, but still keeps swinging on vines, and also keeps crashing onto trees. Meanwhile, about to enter George's jungle is a San Francisco heiress, Ursula Stanhope. She is there with her guide, Mr. Quaim, and 3 porters. All of a sudden, Ursula is tracked down by her fiancé, Lyle Van de Groot, who found her with the help of 2 poachers, Thor and Max. Later that night, Lyle makes all the possible arrangements to fly his fiancé back home, but Ursula is persistent to stay there a few more days. She tells Lyle that she wants to climb the mountains to see the big apes. Just then, Max asks Mr. Quaim to show them the famous white ape. Ursula gets excited listening about the white ape and asks Mr. Quaim to enlighten her a bit more about it. Mr. Quaim explains to the group that the white ape is a local legend of a superhuman primate in the jungle. It is said that he is over 7 feet tall and has the strength of a lion. He rules the jungle from the top of the mountain and wanders alone in the night. While Ursula is highly fascinated to know about him, Lyle makes fun of him and thinks that all that Mr. Quaim is saying is a made-up story. The next day, Mr. Quaim guides Ursula, Lyle, the porters, and the poachers to the top of the mountain ape. As they start their trek, the agitated inhabitants, with the help of their bongograms, send an urgent warning message to George, the Jungle King, that some intruders are close by. On the other hand, while the trekkers cross an unstable bridge, and when Lyle tries to scare everyone by shaking the bridge, one of the porters falls off it. Thankfully, this is not the kind of movie where people die. The potter does not die but gets really big boo-boos. They get back to their tent, where Lyle seems disappointed by the guide and thinks that he is inexperienced. The porters glower at him as they don't really like Lyle at all. And like, seriously, who would like him after what he just did? Lyle thinks that the porters don't like him and might do something bad to him. So he offers them cigars and also gives his camera to one of the porters. However, he ends up being mocked by them in the Swahili language, which he does not understand. Frustrated by the porters, Lyle takes Ursula into the jungle to fulfill her wish of seeing an ape so that they can get out of there as soon as possible. Ursula tries to explain to him that they can't go into the jungle alone as they will get lost. But stubborn Lyle pays no heed, thinking that he can do anything for Ursula. As they take a few steps into the jungle, they are suddenly attacked by a lion. Ursula and Lyle are dead scared to see the lion, but Lyle, instead of saving his fiancée, flees from there while knocking himself out of the process. As the lion steps forward to eat its prey, which is Ursula, the king of the jungle, George is alarmed. Following his tradition of swinging on a vine, he tries to distract the lion and tackles it brilliantly, throwing it back into the jungle. Ursula is left alone and is once again attacked by the lion. But before that could happen, George swings on the vine and carries Ursula with him to save her. However, she is knocked out by the tree and falls unconscious. Meanwhile, Lyle gains consciousness and sees Ursula swinging on a vine with the white ape. As he runs towards her, he again stumbles upon a tree bark only to find Ursula's scrunchie on the ground. Lyle thinks that he will be disgraced by the rest of the crew for leaving his fiancée in the jungle. So he deliberately tears off his clothes, paints his face with the cherry's juice, and makes up a story that Ursula is taken captive by the white ape who gave him a tough fight. In the meantime, George takes Ursula to his home, which is a treehouse. After a night of feverish fantasies, Ursula wakes up to the melodious music of the Bukavu wildlife. She gets up in search of the white ape, but instead is shocked to find an ape who brings her a fancy platter of breakfast. Just then, George arrives with a bundle of bananas and asks Ursula how she's feeling. Ursula thinks she is still daydreaming when she sees an ape reading textbook, a treehouse having room service, and a Tarzan wearing a butt flap. Once again, she passes out, and the ape, who is a sapient, talking gorilla, tries to diagnose her problem. While dabbing her lightly, George is stunned to see something which he hadn't in his entire life. So after living with animals all his life, he hasn't yet met a human female, and all this while, he thought that Ursula was a weird-looking man. The wise ape who raised George tries to explain to him that she is a woman, the female version of his species. Meanwhile, Lyle along with the rest of the crew head inside the jungle in search of Ursula. Lyle tells them that he was outnumbered, and that's the reason he couldn't save Ursula. Mr. Quain and the porters make fun of him for the inconsistencies in his made-up story. In the treehouse, Ursula wakes up and looks for George. They both introduce each other, and Ursula thanks George for saving her life from the lion the other day. She wants to go back to her fiancé and asks George to help her find Lyle. George agrees to help and calls his dog, Shep, who is a giant Asian elephant. Ursula is astonished to see the ginormous elephant that acts like George's dog. She shakes her hand with Shep's trunk only to get a ride up in the air. George shows Ursula how Shep fetches the bark of a tree, and Ursula is amazed to see it. With the help of Shep, George and Ursula set out on a desperate search to find her fiancé, while Lyle also desperately searches for her. By the end of the afternoon, Ursula's desperation dies down and she gives up all her hope. George takes Ursula to find Tookie, a toko toucan. They stop at a place to rest for a while and also let Shep rest after a tiring ride. Tookie informs George that the little monkeys are in trouble and that he must investigate. George tries to solve the monkeys' problem, and Ursula seems impressed to see George's caring and loving nature. While George is infatuated with Ursula, she also feels attracted to him. Meanwhile, Mr. Quaim spots a big footprint on the mud, and he and his crew suspect that it is of the white ape. George and Ursula enjoy their time in the jungle when George shows Ursula how to swing on the vines. He starts developing special feelings for Ursula and decides to woo her. So he asks for the ape's help, but the ape guides him through all the wrong moves that will drift Ursula away from him, as the ape is not too fond of her. While sitting next to a beautiful waterfall, Ursula thanks George for this beautiful adventure, as that's what she always wanted. Taking advantage of the opportunity, George does some strange tactics to impress her that the ape taught him, and Ursula gets weirded out by him. Later that night, Ursula gives George her juju ring to thank him for saving her life, and the two dance their hearts out. George teaches her some jungle moves, and the animals play different instruments to make the night truly magical. The next morning, Lyle, Thor, and Max find the treehouse. Lyle runs to Ursula and tries to get all swoochy with her. She shuts him off, reminding him how he left her with the lion. Just then, Max and Thor spot Shep and point a gun at him for his ivory. Ape shouts at Shep, warning him to run. Seeing the ape talk, everyone's astonished. Thor and Max decide to tranquilize Ape and capture him, as he'll cost a fortune. George runs to save Ape and is shot by Lyle. But remember, this is not a movie where people die. The scene cuts to Ursula taking George to San Francisco on a private jet to get in the best medical help. On the other hand, Max and Thor, who were imprisoned in the Bujumbura jail, are released, and Lyle is imprisoned after the porters identify him as the shooter. Max and Thor decide to capture George's talking ape and make their show business out of him in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, George is fascinated to see the human world and acts like crazy on their way home in a car. At home, he hoots from the balcony and wakes up all the neighbors. The next day, Ursula calls her best friend, Betsy, home, who is extremely impressed to see George and his sexy body. Betsy suggests to Ursula to get George some human clothes, so Ursula and George head out shopping with George wearing Ursula's dress. After getting George an Armani suit, both of them stroll around the streets. Just then, Ursula's controlling mother, Beatrice, spots her daughter with George and quickly finds out that Lyle has not returned from Africa. Being worried about Ursula's engagement party, which is to be held the next day, Beatrice keeps calling her and Ursula keeps avoiding her. The next morning, Ursula leaves for work and asks George to stay home. Before she heads to work, she goes to her dad with Betsy to break the news about Lyle, only to find her father, Arthur, celebrating Lyle and his daughter's return party. Meanwhile, George gets bored at home and leaves the house to explore the city. While climbing on the edge of the Bay Bridge, he notices a parasailer tangled on it. At the same time, Ursula spots George on the news channel attempting to save the stuck parasailer. She rushes to the bridge to get George, who in the meantime uses his effortless vine-swinging ability to rescue the parasailer. After rescuing the parasailer, George lands on the boat where Ursula is waiting for him, and the two hug each other. Beatrice boils with anger after seeing her daughter unfolding romance under the bridge. Meanwhile, back in the jungle, Max and Thor tranquilize the talking ape, who orders Tookie to go find George. They capture the ape in a cage and take him along. On the other hand, George helps Ursula gather the courage to tell her parents the truth. So on the day of her engagement, she tells her parents about her refusal to marry Lyle. Beatrice objects and refuses to cancel the engagement party as she believes that marrying a high-caliber person is more important than having a love marriage. Ursula's dad, on the other hand, keeps his calm and understands the situation. Just then, Beatrice fumes with anger when Ursula's elaborate engagement cake is destroyed by George due to his vine-swinging hobby. At Ursula's engagement party, all the girls fancy George due to his handsome looks and sensual intelligence. Later that night, Beatrice steps outside with George and coldly asks him to stay away from Ursula and not to screw her marriage with Lyle. At night, Tuki arrives in San Francisco, all the way from Bukavu, to inform George about the ape who has been kidnapped. George gives his juju crocodile tooth to Ursula while she's asleep and heads to return to the jungle. The next morning, Ursula is worried about the fact that George left without saying goodbye. Beatrice tries to persuade her into thinking that it's best for her to stay away from him. Just then, Ursula realizes that she is in love with George and goes to find him. Beatrice tries to stop her, but Arthur approves. So there's no stopping Ursula from finding her love. George returns to Bukavu in a cargo box and rushes to the treehouse. On the other hand, Ape tricks Max and Thor into circling the jungle for the past 2 days only to return back to the treehouse. Meanwhile, George finds Ape's broken glasses in the treehouse. He confronts the poachers and a long fight proceeds. Max and Thor try to defeat George by tickling him, but Shep uses his trunk to launch Tuki onto Thor's butt and Coconut onto Max's face. All of a sudden, Ursula arrives by swinging on a vine and lands in George's hands. Finally, George defeats the poachers and asks Ursula why she followed him. Just when Ursula is about to express her love, Lyle arrives. Turns out, Lyle escaped prison, got into a cult, and has now become an ordained minister. He forces Ursula to come with him and marry him. As George steps forward to save her, Lyle's group of men subdue him. Lyle drags Ursula to Ape River, where a boat is waiting for them to escape. Meanwhile, the small monkey gathers the apes of the jungle through the bongogram. George and the ape are saved and out of the cage, while Lyle's mercenaries are locked inside. After that, George rushes to find Ursula, who is in the boat, with Lyle performing the marriage ceremony. As Ursula struggles to sail the boat in the dangerous river, George spots her from afar and performs a big swing on a vine. He hurtfully smashes into a ginormous tree that falls over the river, saving Ursula in the process. Unbeknownst to the fact that Ursula is rescued from the boat, Lyle ends up in a dark cave and declares him and Ursula wedded only to find that he married a gorilla sitting next to him, who tightly smooches onto him. Ursula admits her love to George, who reciprocates the same way, and the two share a passionate kiss. They end up getting married in the jungle with Ursula's parents' blessings and George's animal friends' bliss. The movie ends with George and Ursula living happily in the treehouse with their son, whereas the talking ape becomes a stage performer in Las Vegas. So all good in the end. Thank you so much for watching if you're still here. And also maybe subscribe to the channel if you like the video. I'll be posting more fun content, so make sure to not miss it. That's the end of the video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.